Hello, I'm Denise Galoni. Welcome to today's episode of Empowering You. Today, I'm in the studio. I have my Pirate jersey on, and I'm sitting by the stadium because I have two gentlemen with me today who are baseball historians, Brendan Schuster and Vince Ciaramella. They're going to talk about players from the Negro Leagues and baseball history. I can't wait for you to watch this episode, and I hope you enjoy it.
It's gonna be better. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be better, yeah. It's gonna be great. I can't wait. It's gonna be
I'm back in the studio today with two interesting guys. Brendan Schuster is an international wholesale supervisor with GNC, General Nutrition Center Incorporated, at the world headquarters based in Pittsburgh. A graduate from Slippery Rock University with a BA in communication, he's a Society of America's Baseball Research member, SABR, and creator of the Facebook page Down from the Attic Vintage Sports. He enjoys coaching his kids' baseball and softball teams, reading, and weightlifting. He's a Philadelphia native who resides in Bethel Park with his wife Erica and three kids, Kogan, Kate, and Kara. Vince Ciaramella is a high school psychology and anthropology teacher with Insight, Pennsylvania. He's also the author of 10 books, with his most recent, A Shooting Star Across the Silver Screen, Olive Thomas, a biography, published on October 31st, 2024. He's a baseball and boxing historian focusing on 19th and early 20th century baseball in Pittsburgh. He has a son, Enzo, who is also an Amazon author. Welcome to the studio,
Thanks for
guys.
having us.
Thanks for having us, Denise.
I have been so excited about this. So let me ask you first. How did you get started with this? Now, when you say baseball historian, we're not talking about baseball right now. You're going back to almost the very beginning.
Sure, I'll start real quick. I got about 20 years to cover in a few minutes.
Right.
I read a book called Bury My Heart at Cooperstown, and it was a short story book about how baseball players died and where they're buried.
Okay.
And it struck my interest to say, okay, well, Pittsburgh is rich in baseball history. They have the Pirates, the Grays, the Crawfords.
Sure.
Gee, I wonder if anyone's buried near me.
Oh.
So sure enough, I went and I found Hannes Wagner, who was 15 minutes from my house. And then I found Josh Gibson. And the feeling of finding these guys, it was almost like I felt like I was trespassing, or I wasn't supposed to be there, or I found a treasure. And it was just a little kid inside me finding these areas.
Yeah.
And then just one thing happened after another. I always had the interest to find baseball graves. And then time passed, really around 2020 is when Vince and I met, and we went out together to a few cemeteries, and he's the one that told me about players being in unmarked graves, and I felt something needed to be done. I wasn't sure how to do it, where to go, who to talk to, but that's how really I got started and where I am now.
Vince, how did you get started?
So my story starts with my great-great-grandfather was Pittsburgh's first boxing superstar. His name was Jack McClelland. And I wrote a biography about him. And at that time period in the late 19th century, boxing, baseball, and horse racing were the three big major sports in Pittsburgh. Football and hockey are,
Right.
decades down the road.
Right, sure.
And as I was researching him, he crossed paths with a guy named Chuck Sweeney, who was a ball player. And it just kind of just started from there. So to make a long story short, COVID 2020, I did not want to stay in my house and turn into Jack Nicholson from The Shining. I'm not an indoor person, so.
It was rough.
And my street is a side street, and it turned into Bourbon Street. Everybody was walking. I went to South Park one day, and it was like Woodstock. So my wife's son and I went to Calvary Cemetery, and I was like, well, we'll go see my great-grandfather's grave. And there's 8 miles of road there. On the way, we passed Pud Galvin, who was the first pitcher to win 300 games. Major leaguer, played for the Pittsburgh Alleghenies. So after we found all my family members, the road ran out pretty quickly. was like, let's just start looking for baseball players. I didn't want to go to the graveyards and just hang out for no reason. I kind of felt like Gomez Adams at that point. Don't let the
Yeah.
mustache fool you. So, but yeah, and we used to have to pass Gooden or Galvin's grave to get to my great grandfather, and I was like, I wonder how many other guys are buried here, and that just kind of started a quest, and that ended up in a book called Greats in the Graveyard. We did 2 volumes of it, 1 and 2. One was just major leaguers, including Negro leaguers, but the second one was strictly Negro League players and winter and hotel league players, and that's a whole other topic. But we combined both of them into one book, plus other people we found, and we just put out a thing called the Greats in the Graveyard Compendium, which is the final edition, 187 players buried in the Pittsburgh area. And I found more since then. I'm like, nope, I'm not.
You have to end it somewhere. There's always going to
Yeah.
be, yeah.
And anyway, so during that time period, we were looking for the Negro League players. We started noticing that book was going to be a lot of empty patches of grass because a lot of them were buried in unmarked graves.
Yeah, that's sad.
Socioeconomics at the time dictates, these people probably had money for either a headstone or rent,
Right,
know,
sure,
or
right,
food.
right.
So obviously they chose that. And a lot of these guys, and I'll let Brendan take over with Emmett Bowman because he's probably the one that has the longest unmarked, at least to my knowledge. Yeah, they were unmarked. So Sean Gibson, who's the great grandson of Josh Gibson, I met him in 2020 at a pre-COVID at a baseball Negro League thing at the downtown at the where the mayor office is, city council building. I'm sorry. Anyway, I met him there, and then I said, we should hook up on Facebook. And after the book came out, we kind of floated the idea of marking graves for about a year. Maybe we should do it. We'll get to it. And then 2022, there was a lot of coal that went into that train. It just loaded up fast, and we got people on board, and Brendan jumped on in 2023, and then off we went, and it's been a whirlwind ever since.
So is there a lot of unmarked graves?
We found, well, at the time it was 22, and now we have 25, I think, total, but we've got, how many do we have marked now? You got the number.
We have 13 marked.
Okay.
There's a few in process, but 13 are actually marked.
And these are former baseball players.
Former baseball players, yep. That played in the Negro Leagues.
Okay.
Yep.
And what was Emmett Bowman?
So Emmett Bowman, he passed away in 1912. So he was in an unmarked grave for 111 years.
Jeez.
We got him a marker at Coraopolis Cemetery in the fall of 2023. He was 26 years old. He died from tuberculosis. They're all connected somehow, some way. But his brother George played with another guy that we had marked around the same time, Lefty Pangburn. So there was a connection there.
Yeah, right.
So, and how the actual initiative, the Josh Gibson Unmarked Grave Initiative, really kicked off was Sean's great-grandmother, Josh's wife, Helen. She was in an unmarked grave for 90-some years. In August of 2022, she got a marker at Allegheny Cemetery, close by Josh. But then that's where Sean thought, hey, we've got a marker for her. What other players are in the area that we can get markers for? I mean, she wasn't a player, but that was Josh's wife.
Yeah.
She died the day after she gave birth to the twins.
So all this research, have you found anything interesting? Any interesting stories?
Yeah.
I'm sure there is.
I mean, they all have a story to
Right.
tell, but I'll take one, and I'm sure
I'm sure there's lots of stories.
Yeah, Brendan can take the next one. But the one that really stuck out to me was I write for SABR as well, the Society for American Baseball Research. I've published 20 biographies through them. One of the guys was Dave Allen, and he's in that Never Heard of Them Either book.
Okay. Yep.
He's in that one. So Dave Allen played for the 1887 Keystones. It was the first all-black team from Pittsburgh, and they lasted for 2 weeks. That was it. The whole league collapsed. So there's almost nothing written about these guys other than Saul White played for the team. He was a famous player. He became the first Negro League historian. And a guy named Weldy Walker, who was the second major. People think Jackie Robinson was the first African-American player.
That's right. That's what everyone thinks.
Yeah,
That's what I
but
thought.
actually, it was Walker brothers were in 1884. Were actually the first, and then the color barrier came about 1887, 89, and then that was the end of that until Jackie Robinson. But anyway, so researching these guys, I'm like, well, a lot of these guys don't have anything written about them. So Dave Allen was our second guy we marked. I had already written about Pud Gooden, not the same guy I talked about earlier. There's Pud Galvin and Pud Gooden, and I always mess up who's who. And so I wrote about him, and I was like, well, I might as well get Dave Allen too. And as I was researching him, I found something really, really groundbreaking and tragic, but fascinating at the same time. So 22,000 guys rounded, have played Major League Baseball since about the 1870s. Only one up until recently was known to be a former enslaved person, and that was a guy named Walter White, and he lived in Rhode Island. And there's even some kind of maybe not. I found number 2 with
goodness.
definite answer. His name is David Allen. He's buried over in Monongahela Cemetery in Braddock. I traced him from the slave registries from the 1850s in Virginia. And then in 1860, he was living in like northern Virginia near like Rockingham County. 1870s and 80s, he's in Kentucky. The 1890 census, for all you at home who ever do research, there is no 1890 census. So if you go looking for it, you'll never find it. It'll burn up in a fire. In 1900, I find him in Pittsburgh. And I said, okay, well, how do I, connect the dots? Looked at his children. All his children were born in the Kentucky town where he was at in 1880. So it's the Sabre, that's good enough for them. And I mean, he only played for a couple years, like on the Keystones. They became an independent team that just traveled around. But just to know that guy, was born in chattel slavery, and he's here in Pittsburgh, and he was in an unmarked grave since 1930. So
Wow, that's amazing.
yeah.
And one thing to add, what I find interesting too, at the Monongahela Cemetery, right in the same section, you have David Allen, Pud Gooden, and Jerry Vianney, who was in that 1913 Homestead Graves photo. So there's 3 baseball players right in the same line.
You could
of
throw a
section.
baseball to, between all 3 of their graves. You could play catch.
Wow.
So 2 of them were unmarked.
Yeah.
And then we just got markers for them in the last 2 years. But Jerry Vianney had a marker. So my interesting story is when we first got on the initiative, there was a few of us on the committee, and we did a divide and conquer. So one of my guys was a guy by the name of Emmett Bowman.
Okay.
He was in Coriopolis Cemetery, and I died in 1912. I never heard of his name before. I just knew Vince found him. He was an unmarked. That's all I knew.
Right.
I said, okay, great. Called the cemetery, got the marker put in. I went and I found the marker after it was put in, and I thought, this is pretty cool. I did this. I was
Yeah.
responsible for getting a marker for
Gotta
him.
be a good feeling too.
Nobody saw him before. All cemetery goers never knew he was buried there. He has family there, too, as well, that are marked. But I thought, okay, I need to do something. So when Vince and I were writing Never Heard of Them Either, we were going to write, 3. I was going to do 3 chapters. So I said, I got to find out more about Emmett Bowman. So when I was doing the research, you Google him, there's nothing on him. Absolutely nothing. You can't
Right.
find anything. So looking in old newspapers.com and other sources, turns out he played with Rube Foster. He was his teammate. He played with Pete Hill. He was a Hall of Famer who was inducted in 2006. Pete Hill grew up in Homewood. He played with Grant Home Run Johnson. So he was on arguably one of the best teams ever, the Philadelphia Giants in 1905. So being from Philadelphia, I said, this is my guy.
Right. That's it. Right.
So I kind of, it's hard to find the actual facts and stats. Phil Dixon is a Negro League historian that I use a lot of his information with the book that he wrote on the 05 Giants. But, Emmett Bowman pitched against Eddie Plank, who was in the major leagues, and almost beat him. So they were just as good, if not better than, your Christy Mathesons of the world. You heard about these, Honus Wagner and
Sure.
everybody else playing at that time, Todd Cobb, but you didn't hear about Rube Foster at this time, or Emmett Bowman, or
No.
Pete Hill. These guys here. So Emmett Bowman and his teammates were the trailblazers of the Negro Leagues that started in 1920. Weren't for the Negro Leagues from 1920 to 1947, there might not have been a Jackie Robinson. So they all had a connection. It was just kind of neat to find him and write a story on him. And I had to find it. It was a personal story because I couldn't find that many,
Right.
too many facts or pictures. But I found enough information to actually write about him. So that's my guy and that's my story. And
That's
he
your
was
story.
buried for 111, unmarked for 111 years.
Wow. Amazing.
Awesome.
So do any of these people still have family around in the area? Have you found anyone that has like a great grandchild that would
Willis.
come out to
Yeah.
the?
Well,
So one guy that we know, Willis Moody, who's in an unmarked grave in Chartier Cemetery. Wayne Moody is his grandson.
Okay.
He wrote a book called The Real Story of the Negro Leagues. Great book, highly recommend. We connected because it turns out my mother-in-law kind of knew him because they graduated from the same high school, and we just connected on Facebook. And he shared a lot of the original newspapers that his grandfather was in, playing in the 1920s with Lefty Mullix and all these other guys. So he shared a lot of my Down from the Attic page.
So do you find an unmarked grave first? Do you find a player and try to trace it back, or how does it? The whole thing, like, how do you find out about these players?
So for me, it was I am an insomniac and I can't sleep. So when my son went to bed, I would go through old rosters, and I kind of just like get into this kind of zone where I can't let things go. And so for the Negro League guys, it took me 3 months. I went through every Pittsburgh team, and there's a website called Seamheads that, it's a great website for information. And so if they were either born in Pittsburgh or played in Pittsburgh, I cross-checked them against where did they end up, buried. And that's how I started finding them. And Put Gooden is a good example. So he was buried in Monongahela Cemetery. Okay, so I called them up and said, does he have a marker? And they would either say, we'll get back to you, and they'll come back and say no. And they'll go and I'll ask, okay, can you plant like a flag in the spot so I can mark it with a GPS? So he said, sure, come out on Friday or whenever, we'll have it marked for you. I just drive out there, find the flag, take a GPS hit, photograph it, and then they went into like the database of when we're gonna mark these guys. So it's a lot of like cold calling, and a lot of times you'll find guys too that are buried in Cemetery X on their death certificate, and they call like, we don't have them. And then you got to go, okay, well, they're not there. Maybe they're in the next cemetery over. Record keeping in the 19th and early 20th century was atrocious.
Right.
So yeah, it's a fun game if you like playing detective, and I do. And we grew up in the 80s, so we were in the Indiana Jones and Goonies era.
Yeah, it's really going like line by line. Find a Grave's a good website. But yeah, looking at the teams, finding out, okay, does he have a marker? And like you said, if there's a picture on Find a Grave, he has a marker. If not, then that's a call to the cemetery to confirm. And it's a lot of it. There's no website that's just these are all the unmarked players everywhere. It's a lot of research.
And some of these guys, these cemeteries are quasi abandoned. We think of like perpetual care, and I hate to say we've kind of come to the conclusion it's a myth. Like Jim Binder, he has a marker, but he's buried in Braddock Cemetery. So my son and I went up there, and we literally had to dig him out. He had a flat World War II marker, and we always have like little spades and shovels, and we dug them out and cleaned them up. So John Vianney? Is it the one that said that sounds? Yeah, he may be in the same, but the records are gone. So who knows?
So is that why you wrote the first book? Never heard of him. 12 Tales from Pittsburgh's Baseball Past.
Yeah, that came out because I was bored. I was actually literally.
I was bored.
I was.
Just read a book.
I was in the giant Walmart down in Washington, walking through like the ethnic food section, buying spaghetti sauce. I'm like, I should write a book about Honus Wagner's brother, because nobody knows about Honus Wagner had a brother named Butts Wagner, and then it kind of like, well, there's not really a book in him. And Josh Gibson had a brother named Jerry Gibson. I'm like, but there's not really a book in him. And that kind of just spawned the idea of I should find people that had interesting stories, that had beyond baseball. There's a guy named, oh my goodness, it's going to get kind of confusing. Well, he has like 12 different names he played under. Was his Jacob? Well, his name is either Jacob or Jake Seamer or Sermer, or it's spelled like a thousand different. And literally, he lived next door to the Exposition Park, where it's in the north side, and he was a neighbor of the Pirates. And they said, "Hey, you should come over and pitch a game for us." So he didn't even have like a record of playing baseball, and he stunk. And like they never played again. But finding him was a pain because he's under so many different names, and so that's kind of the fun of that and then afterwards I was like, I still had 2 left over that I didn't want to put in the book. And
so that's this one.
Yeah, and that led into that one.
Never heard of them either. And then Brendan, you got on this book as
so
well.
That's where I jumped in.
That's where you jumped in, okay.
Yeah, and I wrote 3 chapters.
Okay.
And there could be a third book coming out sometime in the future. So that's not been. Sorry.
No worries. Emmett Bowman.
We have a scoop we're hearing right here. A third book coming out.
Breaking news.
Now, what's that going to be called? Never heard of them either.
But yeah, there's 3 guys that I wrote about. Emmett Bowman, Lee Hanley, who had a big tie with Jackie Robinson. He was in a March grave, so he wasn't one of ours on the list. And then Willis Moody is the 3 that I wrote about. So
you talked about the Josh Gibson Grave Markers Project. So and that started. I'm sorry. When did that start again?
kind of the seed was planted about 2021, but
Okay.
really about December of 2022 is when it really kind of started to congeal into a real thing, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the Pud Gooden was put in. He was the first marker put in July of
July 7th.
2023. So we're going really 2 years, 3 years of the initiative. And one of the things that I did, I hooked up with a teacher from Seneca Valley, a seventh grade social studies teacher, and they raised money for one of the markers in Greenwood.
It has to be a
Charlie Hughes.
challenge.
So what they did, they made morning announcements. Every dollar you donate, you get a lollipop. They made flyers. They were really into it. So that was really neat to. I presented them with a nice little plaque when I went to the school in March of last year. So that was neat to teach them history because, they could say, "Oh, what did you learn in seventh grade?" I helped raise money for a Negro League baseball player who was in an unmarked grave for X amount of years.
Because headstones are expensive.
Yeah, about
So they
$600.
Yeah, we worked out a deal with Rome Donatelli over
Okay.
on is it Brighton Road? I think it's over right on, or Brightwood Road, whatever, on the north side right there. And they've been incredibly accommodating and very good. They gave us a deal. A
Oh,
flat
that's
deal,
good, yeah.
$600 a stone. The footer, which is the under a grave, if you put a grave in the ground, it'll sink.
Yeah,
you got to
you
put
have
a
to
footer.
yeah.
So sometimes the cemetery will, like Monongahela Cemetery in Braddock has said we'll get every one of them. So they've been very gracious. Others don't have the money for it, and I understand, so we have to pay for that. So $600 to $900, somewhere in that range, and most places have been very accommodating. And yeah, it's been a real good time. And I think that's kind of one thing I would like to make a note of. It's not just us. It's Sean Gibson, Chris Cox from the Pittsburgh Opera Company, his daughter, and all the people that was it Tom Kern and his sister Deb. Yeah, and all the people that have donated. So this has been a many hands going into this.
Right.
Yeah.
So it has to be fundraising.
Yes. Yep, a lot of fundraising.
A lot of fundraising.
Yep, so we have a website, jgfmemorialmarkers.org, that has listed all the players, the cemeteries, where you can donate. One of the guys that I'm working on right now is in Homewood. He was cremated, so he doesn't actually have a lot
Okay.
that we can put a marker in. So we're making a plaque for him. So that would be neat. That would be our first actual plaque that we're doing. So that hopefully will be available this year.
And you said you had 13?
13 are marked now.
13 are marked.
Yep.
And there's 3 other ones that are ready to go in the ground as soon as Allegheny Cemetery gives us we're good, So the stones are made. They're just waiting for. Usually they start digging around Memorial Day, and they go
The
until about
ground's
Labor
softer.
Day. Yeah. So very soon, there's 3 guys, and that will clear out all of Allegheny, and then it just leaves these stragglers and these little tiny ones that we may or may not ever really get to, just because Minersville Cemetery up on the hill. The cemetery was actually vandalized in 1962. People threw all the headstones over a hill. So there's a guy named Walter Brown. He was the manager for the Keystones. He died in 1895. Now we know he's there, but we don't know where. So there's talks of maybe getting like a boulder or something that has a plaque on it. It's just saying somewhere in the cemetery,
Right,
lies Walter Brown. But
So it's going to take more time than just putting in a marker.
Sure.
so that stay tuned.
And more can pop up. Have we found them all? I don't know. Maybe more just you go to find a grave. Okay, I found a guy that doesn't have a marker. His death, and then it says burial information unknown, but he died in Pittsburgh. Where do we go from here?
We did find recently, not players, but executives. One of the guys was there's those Blue Historic State markers. They don't always have the right information. The one that says Greenleaf Field was the first black-owned and operated baseball field. It's
Okay.
not. There was Central Amusement Park, which is 2 blocks over. And we find the guy that built it. He's in an unmarked grave in Highwood Cemetery. So now we've got another guy on our list. And that's incredibly historic because he was an immigrant who came here and built a stadium. It only lasted for about 5 years. But Rube Foster played there and all these other guys. Willis Moody. And if you go, and a lot of people don't know, Pittsburgh baseball goes back to 1857. The first game played was at West Common near where Gus and Yaya's stand is. There's no marker. If you know where the Rooneys lived, it's right across the street, that big mansion. And that was 1857. A guy named Al Pratt, he became a Civil War veteran, played there. Eventually, he threw out the very first pitch, the very first National League game in 1871 for the Cleveland Four Cities. And he's buried in Uniondale?
Yep.
In his full uniform, so he can go visit Al Pratt.
Wow. That's amazing. I'm just fascinated by this because I love baseball. I'm a baseball fan, but most of these names I've never heard of. When I read about you, and I think it was in the Bethel Park magazine, I can't believe that there's these unmarked graves and
Yeah.
all these books.
Yeah, people hear the Hall of Famers. They know who they are.
Sure.
But haven't heard about these other players that need their story retold.
Yeah. And thank you so much for the book. I can't wait to get into these books and read them. So now, what's next besides keep adding people to the list?
Well, we got the Homestead Grays book coming out.
Oh,
Yeah, the
okay.
1931 Homestead Grays. Vince and I are going to be part of that. He wrote a story. I wrote on a terrible Ted Page, who was buried near Josh Gibson in Allegheny Cemetery. Just went to saw him. His birthday was on April 22nd, so I went and stopped by because I don't know how many people have visited him on his birthday.
Right.
You know,
right.
but I did.
Okay. Okay.
And my chapter is going to be on Lefty Williams. He was the third guy we marked. He's at Homestead Cemetery. And Homestead was abandoned for a very long time, and a group of people have taken it over, volunteers. And he was our third guy, and he was a awesome pitcher. He was a southpaw. When Cumberland Posey, a Hall of Famer, needed firepower on the mound, they brought him in. And he actually even went out and played in Hawaii before Hawaii was even a state, you know?
Wow.
So he's got a really cool story, but that's my chapter. And everybody is doing one chapter of one of the guys that played for the 31 Grays. That should be out sometime in 2026.
What is one thing you want people to take away from this interview?
You know, really just to help preserve history.
Yeah.
I think is we get so busy driving by and going to doing your schedules and going to work and doing certain things.
Always go.
And you pass a cemetery every day, and all it takes is just to drive through and find a guy and learn a little bit more about him. And I feel that's one way to connect with the player is to actually go visit his grave, because you think, well, who else was here at the time when he was buried? Was Babe Ruth here? Was Miller Huggins here? Who was at the actual site at the time? But it's one way to connect and get to know the player.
Yeah.
But it's just helping to preserve history, because who else is going to do it besides us? And it's good for the kids, to teach them now, because once when we go, we're not going to get out of life alive. So if Enzo and Kogan and anybody else can help, preserve history and mark these guys and retell their stories, because they need to be told. They were important figures of the game we love today.
Right. Vince, how can you top that?
Well, I will say that's
That was
fantastic.
perfect. That was wow.
I will
sounds
say-
like it was rehearsed.
Well, yeah.
I've done this a time or two.
There is a kind of a burgeoning renaissance in looking for Pittsburgh history for baseball. There's a guy named Len Martin. If you see those monuments behind Stage AE, those markers, he's beautifying parking lots all over the north side. Exposition Park's home plate, Three Rivers home plate. So that's all going up. Our work. It's kind of an unofficial thing, but I think there's kind of eventually going to be a push for Pittsburgh baseball tourism, and we're helping bring that. Guys come here when they want to see where Three Rivers was. You might be Bob Gibson. When he pitched a no-hitter there. People from that town. What was he? Was it Cincinnati? Or was it Cleveland? Or I can't remember who he played for. Anyway, he pitched a no-hitter there.
Cardinals.
Cardinals. Yeah, you're right. Cardinals. That's it. The Cardinals. You can see where the mound was, but then you can go visit Josh Gibson, or you can go visit Emmett Bowman or Dave Allen. So eventually, hopefully that kind of all coalesces into one giant. You can come to Pittsburgh and spend a weekend hunting baseball history, because we have a lot to offer.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here and telling us all these stories and sharing all this knowledge. And I can't wait to read these books and find out more.
Well, thank you for having us. Enjoy the books.
Oh, absolutely.
To be continued.
To be continued,
Yep.
right?
So thank
And
you again.
I want to come on that tour. We'll bring a camera. We'll go on the
Anytime
tour.
you want to.
Yeah, for sure. Love to have you. Love to show you around.
Oh, thank you.
It's gonna be great. It's gonna be
Well, I hope you enjoyed watching today's episode as much as I enjoyed being a part of it. I want to thank Brendan Schuster and Vince Charmella for sharing their expertise with us and talking about baseball history here in Pittsburgh and their passion for the Josh Gibson grave markers. If you want to hear more, Vince, on August 10th in the Homestead Cemetery, will be doing tours of some of the baseball players that are there, so you'll want to check that out. I hope their passion and their mission encourages you to go out and live the best life possible. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.
It's gonna